Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies. It's an honor to address the UN Security Council again. And I would like to thank Bahrain for convening this meeting. I wish you all the best for your presidency. Every year, the Security Council reviews the European Union's partnership with the United Nations on peace and security. And this is fitting even if we only look at the financial metrics. The EU and our member states provide 42% of the official development assistance, but make up only 5% of the global population. Our member states finance a quarter of the UN's regular budget, and we pay full and we pay in time. But the EU has never considered our support for the United Nations purely on how much we spend. We have been active on peace building. If you think about the European Union missions, some of them like the Operation Irene under the direct UN mandate, others in cooperation with the UN are providing concrete EU support to peace building. Through Operation Aspides, we are protecting freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, and we have for years been the singular biggest supporter of peace and security in Somalia through our contributions to UN and African Union peacekeeping efforts. And as the main donor to the Palestinian Authority and its reform process, also leading humanitarian donor in Gaza, and our operational commitments to EUBAM Rafah, EUPOL COPS missions, we are actively promoting the two-state solution and implementation of the Gaza peace plan. We do all this in support of the United Nations because it is the only international system that stands for peace, represents the global collective interest, and protects the international law. And today we are witnessing the gravest violation and breakdown of the international law since the Second World War. As a result, peace and security are in demise. This is why the EU support for the UN now is more vital than ever. Excellencies, the breakdown of international law is evident in today's two preeminent global crises: Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. Russia is executing one of the most outrageous breaches of the international law in the United Nations history by invading a sovereign country and turning its back on its obligations as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The war in the Middle East has caused immense instability and cost far too many lives. It is no longer regional or simply about the security in the region. It affects ripple worldwide. Citizens from Europe to Asia are suffering from higher energy prices. Farmers from Africa to South America are facing fertilizer shortages, and the crisis is accelerating structural vulnerabilities in the global system, concentrated energy dependencies, fragile trade corridors, and the asymmetric exposure of emerging economies. Excellencies, Russia is also supporting Iran with intelligence and drones. Prolonging the war benefits Russia through higher energy prices, depleted air defense arsenal, and diverted attention. I've just returned from my visit to the Gulf region. Their roads, airports, hotels, energy infrastructure, and other civilian infrastructure have been hit by the same tools that wreak havoc in Ukraine. Together, the crisis in Europe and the Middle East represent the clearest sign yet of an abandonment of the old rules, including the UN Charter. A new world is now in the making, characterized by competition and coercive power politics. A world order dominated by a handful of military powers who aim to establish spheres of influence. How the world responds to this moment says less about the new emerging order than it does about us, because we have been here before. We are hearing a lot about multipolarity today, but let's be clear. Multipolarity, unrestrained by the UN Charter or international law, multipolarity guided only by the spheres of influence, has never been peaceful, stable, nor conducive to global security or evenly distributed economic development. and ultimately it always ends in devastation. In the aftermath of the First World War, the world decided to try something different, multilateralism instead of multipolarity. A League of Nations was born. After the Second World War, important lessons were learned. We recommitted to multilateralism with an understanding that the international system had to evolve as the world did. It had to have a buy-in and legitimacy to work. Today, it seems we are forgetting these lessons and what it takes to make the system work. Some even question the very utility of multilateralism as an organizing principle of the international relations. You will never see Europe taking that path. In fact, the history of the European Union has followed a similar trajectory to the development of the international order. Europe will always choose cooperation over coercion. Just like the current international order, the European Union is plagued by imperfection, but that does not mean we stop trying to do better. That is why, when it comes to the international order, Europe can be part of the solution. And this is why, when countries seek reliable, principled partners to bolster alliances, defend international law, and move multilateralism forward, increasingly they turn to the European Union. I hear this every single time I meet with the foreign leaders. Excellencies, international cooperation based on UN Charter benefits citizens everywhere in the world. That is also why, despite its many challenges, the decline in multilateralism has actually put it back on the table. This is today's paradox. Even if the biggest military powers are losing interest, everyone else isn't. The question now is how to transform the ailing multilateral system into one that works for all. The European Union shares the belief that the United Nations must address the need to prevent wars. For that, we need to be clear about the role of the UN. Firstly, international law sets legal parameters for the use of force by states, and they could not be clearer. Only for self-defense and with the mandate from the Security Council. Rules are being broken today with impunity. And secondly, conflict prevention is as much about upholding international rights, rules and norms as it is about addressing the root causes of conflict: poverty, inequality and climate change, the lack of transitional justice, to name just a few. The UN works to make a concrete, tangible difference in people's lives where countries cannot do it alone. Both strands must remain central to UN's work. As the EU has learned through its own history, practical, incremental steps eventually lead to transformative change. We can and should move forward on specific topics, in making the rules stick, and on improving processes. On specific topics, I bring you 2 examples. First, peace mediation, peace building, and peacekeeping. There have been many criticisms against the United Nations, including the Security Council, for failing to resolve conflicts. The record use of veto in 2024, for example, suggests that this body struggles to address conflicts as they arise. On one hand, if the Security Council was functioning as it should, we would not be where we are today. On the other hand, it is a chance for the UN to step up and show that it can deliver. More conflict also requires more mediation. And there is already so much we know about what works and what doesn't. The United Nations should oversee a revival of best practices. For example, we know that the dialogue led by the local communities, minorities and young people makes peace stick. We know that including women in negotiations vastly increases the chance of lasting peace. We also know that involving multilateral structures, the UN, helps overcome national interests. These principles are not being consistently applied in mediation efforts today, but they must be if the goal is durable peace. And peacekeeping remains crucial where mediation fails and always requires the broadest international support possible. Since 1948, UN peacekeepers from over 120 countries have protected civilians and saved lives. I'm proud to say that our member states are currently the largest collective financial contributor to the UN peacekeeping budget. The EU is looking at how we can engage further ourselves. Take Lebanon, for example, where we are exploring how we could better support the Lebanese armed forces. Also to complement UN presence and the important bilateral efforts by several countries. But the war has to end as soon as possible. My second example is maritime security. Our collective security, safety and prosperity are totally intertwined with what happens at sea. Maritime security underpins global communications, energy supply and economic development. Yet, this domain has become increasingly contested. Whether we are talking about the Baltic, North or the Red Seas, the numerous straits or the Indo-Pacific, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, is being undermined deliberately. International cooperation at sea has not evolved at the same rate as the threats in this domain. We must catch up. What is happening today in the Strait of Hormuz is the clearest call yet for a strong international coalition on maritime security. There are many initiatives on the table, but the objectives are simple: safe passage for all shipments via this route. Let me be clear. EU will continue to reject any arrangement that rules to limit free and safe passage through the straits in accordance with the international law. Excellencies, the EU, like I mentioned, I've just returned from the Middle East, and it's clear that the fragile truce hangs in the balance, but it offers the much-needed opportunity to negotiate. The European Union will continue to contribute all diplomatic efforts to prevent the region from sliding into further chaos. We commend Pakistan for the facilitation of the further talks and encourage the negotiations to continue. Excellencies, protecting the freedom of navigation is not only challenged today. Submarine cables and pipelines are already targets for sabotage. For this reason, we should step up work towards a new multilateral agreement to establish legal certainty and develop the tools to address these threats. When we know what works, we should replicate the successes elsewhere. Excellencies, if we pledge to the founding principles of the United Nations, including the UN Charter, and envisage growing the body of international law, then we must agree to how to make the rules stick. To make the rules stick, we must strengthen accountability. International law is only as effective as we are willing to make it. The need for accountability is why we are helping set up a tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Without the crime of aggression, which is the leadership crime, there wouldn't be any war crimes either. Without leadership accountability, war crimes will persist. The Security Council bears special responsibility for making the rules stick, because there can be no security in the world of impunity. And this is why I salute the initiatives to curb veto abuse, such as the initiative introduced by Liechtenstein to trigger a General Assembly debate when the veto is used, and also the French and the Mexican initiative to curtail the use of the veto in the case of atrocity crimes. When this body fails to deliver on its responsibility for peace and security, we should consider reverting the question to the General Assembly. And finally, on process. Our collaboration does not need to be confined to what we have gotten used to over the 80 years. Let's think outside of the box on how we approach bilateral partnerships, alliances, regional organizations, coalitions of the willing, minilateral, plurilateral arrangements. For instance, We could convene regional organizations around a specific theme of interest. We could think of multilateral partnerships based on particular issues. We could include other stakeholders more systematically, such as business, in tackling common challenges. All of these are complementary to the multilateral rules-based order that most states want. None must undermine it. Every iteration should be in the line with UN principles, or else we risk a United Nations in name only. If we do more of this, cross-regionally and with critical mass, we could strengthen the system as a whole. President, Excellencies, if the first success of the United Nations was its capacity to evolve as the world community did, this is no longer the case. From modest representation for rising economies in the Security Council to the role of the General Assembly in holding the most powerful to account, the do-do list is long. Without fairness, there is no hope to make it work again. But we do remain hopeful. The EU continues to be a firm believer in the United Nations and its capacity to change. The EU has its own long experience reforming, adjusting, and transforming itself. We know that doing so is not the one-shot project. It involves listening, negotiation, political compromises, and a healthy dose of humility. We also know what it's worth. Excellencies, 100 years from now, historians will look back at this moment and they will ask, what did the United Nations do when the rules-based order was under threat? Did we cling to the past, defending a system that no longer worked for many? Or did we have the courage to reform it, to make it stronger, fairer, and more resilient? Did we stand by the ruthless when the ruthless rewrote the rules? Or did we stand together and say, no, the law applies to all? Did we resign ourselves to a world of spheres of influence where might makes right? Or did we choose cooperation over coercion, justice over impunity, and peace over war? And the answer is in our hands. As members of this Council, you are entrusted with the responsibility to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That was the promise of 1945, and it must be our mission today. Let us be the generation that built a stronger, fairer order, one fit for the challenges ahead. The time of action is now. Thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency Kallas for her briefing.